Dr. Rupa Marya is a physician and activist. She's been a major part of revolutionary health initiatives like the Justice Study, which looks at the links between police violence and health in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and Seeding Sovereignty, a group that promotes Indigenous autonomy in climate action. She's also the co-author with Raj Patel of Inflamed, Deep Medicine, and the Anatomy of Injustice. Inflamed is a book that helps us locate the roots of disease in a system of overproduction that pumps so much toxicity into our communities. In September 2024, Marya was put on leave by the University of California, San Francisco in response to her criticism of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, and just weeks ago was fired for her comments. She has now filed multiple free speech complaints against UCSF, which didn't even align with its own processes in firing her. Exposing the obvious danger that fascism poses to providing care should not come at the cost of someone's career. Trying to convey the sheer magnitude of this horrific bombardment on the healthcare system in Palestine should not mean this level of risk. The message from many Western institutions, though, is that basically any expression of pro-Palestinian dissent is now going to either be crushed or completely ignored. These institutions, including many universities, are complicit in the political cowardice and settler colonial racism that lets the genocide continue. The crackdown on dissent is ramping up everywhere, and because the Israeli propaganda machine has struggled to obscure the reality of this genocide with its lies, accusations, and brinksmanship, the only strategy left is just to go after people, either by attacking their ability to do their job or by detaining and disappearing them, and of course by assassinating them if you are the IDF. Our conversation is really about the emergence of a world order that could not care less about the question of how to cultivate health. I mean, Gaza has endured 638 days of hell. Unimaginably, Israel has delighted in raining down hell on Gaza for more than 15,000 straight hours. 2 years of witnessing the humiliation and annihilation of people in Gaza. What has it done to us, this event? Has it changed time the way the pandemic did? Does it make us relate differently to things and people around us? The water, the air, the peace we get to experience? Has seeing these things and thinking about the poisonous roots of what we're seeing done anything to our sense of how we should be governed? I wonder because in this discussion, Marya lays out exactly the kinds of sacrifices that need to be made so that health can serve as a rallying cry for ending this obscene domination of Palestine. This is an extremely incendiary moment in United States politics when it comes to whether it's acceptable to critique the forces, I would say, of fascism, oppressive forms of authoritarianism, far-right populism, all of these forces that are really surging right now. You see the Trump administration, for example, escalating its attacks on universities and colleges in the U.S., claiming, that they're fighting anti-Semitism and so on, but really like focusing on cutting federal funds at Columbia, at Harvard, revoking visas for thousands of international students, abducting pro-Palestinian students and professors. There's this crackdown, this, pro-Israel kind of McCarthyist crackdown on the ability to decry the kind of annihilationist violence that the Zionist regime in Israel is embarking upon. And you have, in fact, people like Justice Department official Leo Terrell saying that the point of this crackdown is to bring universities to their knees. But I think from your perspective, there's far more going on at the level of kind of trying to regulate what's sayable and regulate what's knowable about Palestine. Can you speak to how you feel as though these institutions have tried to shut you down, have tried to actually silence your voice, and the kinds of repercussions you've faced in just being persistent?
Yes. Well, thank you. And it's important to note that what we are living through right now in the US didn't start with Trump. This
Mm,
is this, especially this wave of reactionary force moving through our universities, really got its hold under Biden and Harris as the genocide in Gaza started, and as they, continued to shove it in all of our faces during the election cycles. So the while I started getting harassed, surveyed, retaliated against after October 2023 by UCSF leadership, that pattern of harassment actually has been around for many years. And it started when in 2011, the first time I can remember, I advocated for someone who was a former patient who I saw as a resident, who was a middle aged white man who had mental illness, who was unhoused, who was shot to death by the BART police in San Francisco within 2 minutes of encountering him when he was in mental health crisis. And at that time, I was shocked to see this man who I had seen several times in the emergency room. I would walk from the hospital to my home after my overnight shifts and see him on the streets. I would make sure he was taking his medicine, just stop and check in on him whenever I found him. Charles Hill, and he was shot and killed. And so I penned an open letter to San Francisco saying, like, hey, look, we have folks like this in crisis all the time in the hospital, and we have techniques and ways in which we are able to keep them safe and not kill them. Or
yeah,
not let them hurt people. So
right.
let us train you in how to manage this population of people. And that letter ended up getting picked up by Anonymous and tweeted around the world thousands and thousands of times. And I got a call from the university's lawyers telling me that I had broken federal privacy law because A, I said that I was this person's doctor, and B, I shared that he had mental illness. And I said, well, who is going to sue me? Like, where's the problem here? I was advocating for my patient who we've never seen his family. We don't know, he was unhoused for years.
Hmm.
And they said, well, technically it would be the family. And I said, well, do you think the family would sue me for advocating for their family member not to be shot by the police? So it just sounded preposterous.
Hmm.
But that was the first time that they started harassing me based on my speech. And it continued. So as the years went on and my understanding and analysis grew around racism in medicine, specifically, and who gets to live and who gets to die within the medical system in the United States. I started becoming more vocal about my Black patients, Indigenous patients, undocumented patients, unhoused patients, and how when I would not see them getting the standard of care, I would speak up. And
Hmm.
when that would happen, I would invariably face a call into the office. I was told, all these words that are used that are basically racist and sexist tropes about women who are really good at their jobs in professional settings were used against me.
Right.
I was being admonished and called unprofessional, which to me started to lead to the conclusion that to be professional in academic medicine is to ignore your Black patients, is to let your Indigenous patients not get the standard of care, is to not advocate. And so we're in this time and period where the world was reacting to then George Floyd, to this rising awareness about how structural racism impacts health, all of these window dressing maneuvers of anti-racist task forces, and let's make statements and let's make proclamations, but let's not actually change power. Who has power and who doesn't? And that's really what I study. Power, more than any determinant of health, more than race, socioeconomic status, immigration status, gender, power dictates who gets to be healthy and who gets to be sick in
Mm.
modern societies organized through colonial capitalism. And so, like the United States, like Canada, like a lot of these settler colonial states. And so that is, that is really what that analysis, when I started sharing it in my book,
Mm-hmm.
when I was even writing my book, I started getting death threats at UCSF. I started getting harassment. People were trying to use the public records system to get my manuscript before it was published. Um, and at that time, in the wake of George Floyd, UCSF went out to protect me, introduced me to the head of police, taught me like security mechanisms to keep me safe, took down my public profile for a while so that the death threats would go away. And this was leading up to the election in 2020. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the harassment then went off the charts, like off the charts, off the rails when I said stop bombing hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
So in October of 2023, I started sharing on social media my analysis around, it's not just my analysis, the analysis around Israel as a settler colonial state,
Yeah.
which it was defined as by the founding Zionists, back in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s. This
Mm-hmm.
is a settler colonial project. We have to deal with these pesky natives. We need to build an iron wall, all this stuff, right? And so, as I was articulating this understanding in the wake of October 7th and framing my own particular understanding, given the study I have done of the dynamics of indigenous sovereignty, dynamics of land theft, and colonial harm here in Turtle Island. It was, immediately I started getting these weird emails from people in UCSF,
Mm-hmm.
and people who never contacted me and about my social media posts were contacting me, one in particular. And what was interesting is that these were white folks who were then leading these investigations, these faculty conduct investigations, using Title VI, which are the protections that were created by the civil rights movement to protect someone just like me, a woman, a Punjabi person, someone of immigrant ancestry, someone with disabilities. So I was like in the I was just floored to watch people of immense privilege um, framing themselves as victims so that they could
Yeah.
use these tools to silence us.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that came suspensions, attacks on my medical license. I had a plainclothes police officer show up at a lecture and harassed and intimidated the students. I was subjected to several different investigations and hearings, and ultimately they fired me on May 20th without an academic senate hearing, which I was waiting for and which I am due.
Mm-hmm.
They just fired me.
Yeah. It's overwhelming to kind of hear you describe the long history of this kind of escalating fear that, identifying the kind of like the deep roots of marginalization, of inequality, of this really deadly imbalance of power, right? Like exposing that became increasingly threatening, it seems like, to a university system that has a history of censoring faculty and staff members, right? Especially for speaking out about Palestine. A November investigation by The Intercept revealed widespread anti-Palestinian and pro-Israeli bias across UCSF, which runs the biggest hospital system in San Francisco, right? A January report issued by the UCLA Task Force on Anti-Palestinian, Anti-Arab, and Anti-Muslim Racism found similar patterns of bias at UCLA's medical school. So censoring academic work, suppressing the free speech of students, medical residents, and faculty around Palestine. At UCSF, the largest donor is the Helen Diller Family Foundation, which gave $100,000 to the Canary Mission, right? And is basically a pro-Israel propaganda group, right? So there is this like long history that isn't well known of favoring a particular version of the truth, right? And I think like that's where folks like you really need to be supported. And so it's really interesting that like when you take the risk of advocating for this level of radical care, of kind of cosmopolitan liberation from these like oppressive structures, it's when new media boosts that message through public communication that they seem to get really nervous, right?
They get very
Yeah.
nervous. And that's,
Yeah,
yes, that is exactly right. And I could honestly, Scott, I could write about this till the cows come home.
sure.
But what we will see through the lawsuits that we filed last week will show exactly what you're talking about. Will
Okay.
show the impediments to the kind of liberation medicine we need to practice to have health for all. And so I can write about health inequities. I can write about racism in medicine. We can have studies. We can have symposia. We can have academic papers about this.
Mm,
But what will be transformative, or what would be the deep medicine, is addressing structural harm with structural change. And
mhm,
structural change will come through exposure. And so that is why when they fired me, there have been several other doctors, I think now 4 physicians who've been fired in the US for advocating for Palestine. None of the other ones have been public. They don't want to go on the record. They don't want to be in the news. They're not even suing their universities.
mm,
Um, and so that to me is a shame because they didn't do anything wrong. None of them did. They advocated for the rights of Palestinians not to be wiped off the face of the earth.
right.
And as a doctor, we should be able to advocate for the rights of all people not to be wiped off the face of the earth because our purview is human life. Our purview is caring for all people. And so that is our charge. And when we are not following that charge, that is an alarming thing for people to look at. So if your doctor is not talking about the genocide, is not advocating for the rights of all people to have health, or Palestinians right now to have food and medicine, it belies a deep-seated racism. And racism in medicine kills. It doesn't matter what kind of racism. You're like, oh well, they like me, but they don't like that group over there, so I will be okay. Racism, a pattern of preferencing one group of people over another, leads to poor health outcomes. We know this,
Mhm,
and so this is something that people need to think about because we have accepted that you can be a racist and be a doctor.
mm,
We've just accepted it. We don't accept it if you can't do organic chemistry. You can't become a doctor. If you get a C in organic chemistry, if you get, just a barely passing grade in some
right.
classes, you can't become a doctor. If you can't, memorize certain things, you can't become a doctor. But
Mm,
if you are a racist and you are okay with the murdering of children who are walking and playing in the streets in Gaza, that's okay. And that speaks to a huge problem. The same thing goes for, patriarchy in medicine. There was a study that came out a few years ago that showed that male doctors, male surgeons do not have great outcomes for female patients, the same way
mhm,
that female surgeons do. There was
right.
no call to like stop stop operations and say we better make sure these male doctors aren't killing women. There
Yeah.
was nothing like that. These people need to be remediated and trained so they don't harm half the human population. Nothing. There was nothing like that because the assumption is that power will go uncontested in medicine. And that is unacceptable if you care about a truly liberation framework in medicine. And that is what I've been articulating, and that is what I care about in Palestine, is showing us the fault lines, is exposing it for everyone to see. And
Yeah.
so that is why we've decided to go ahead with these lawsuits, free speech and discrimination.
Yeah. And thankful, like, I'm thankful for that, right? Like the energy it takes to go forward with that and the kind of like militancy it takes to really stand up to these powerful forces. Like I'm genuinely thankful for that because, what it argues is that we have a right not just to kind of theorize this in the abstract at some kind of high level, Like, as you say in your Common Dreams piece, the abundance or lack of power dictates who lives and who dies, right? To disrupt the dynamics of power or even to name them would damage one's personal aspirations, one's reputations, one's career. You're becoming like evidence of that, right? The kinds of disciplinary action you face makes it very difficult to have a career from this point on. But you're like, fuck the odds. I'm going to just do what is right in this context because there is no other choice. And I guess, this, you say the point of this repression is to silence me, to make an example out of me, and to cast me out of favor, unprofessional, as an outlier. And you face that for a long time. What seems to be the kind of tipping point here is that you weren't just addressing it in the abstract, right? You weren't simply saying it's okay to be racist and a doctor. You were saying that there is a particular doctor at this institution who worries a ceasefire would empower Hamas, who clearly does not understand this siege fully enough to comment on it, and yet is commenting in a way that basically advocates genocide, right? And so you use your platforms to say, like, this kind of statement is an impediment to health equity. And I mean, you're also not accused, but like some would accuse you of making the university unsafe for Jewish students by simply pointing out that a number of people that are coming to your university from Israel may have served in the IDF, may have participated in this exterminationist campaign. So it's those. It seems like it was those specific acts that really, gained a level of traction and then gained, a lot of attention from the powers that be. Can you speak
Yeah.
to like whether that's true? Like, was that the tipping point where it was like it became personal, kind of?
So the naming of the dynamics that were happening within the hospital were really important because they spoke to how, again, power is allocated, what viewpoints can be shared, and what viewpoints were silenced. What racist viewpoints could be held as completely normal, just collegial conversation to say, let's not stop murdering children. Essentially, that's what was being said when we're saying no ceasefire in response to these are all the children who've died. Well, we don't really want a ceasefire. So to me, that showing touched a nerve, that demonstration, but also the showing of the level of privilege that certain people have to commit genocide, to participate in genocide, and then to go on and have a career. For example, there's a professor at Emory University, Josh Weiner, who is a professor of surgery, went to serve in Gaza in a combat unit during the genocide, came back to teach surgery to students with no repercussions.
No controversy.
No controversy. So a Palestinian American student, Umaima Mohammed, said, what do I have to learn about medicine from someone who's basically annihilating my people?
Right.
Participating in the annihilation of my people. She got suspended for that comment. So when we point out in specific cases, not just theoretically, not just like, hey, let's talk about this as a concept of international humanitarian law, that it is illegal. It is illegal and against the Geneva Convention to endorse and enable genocide. And this has happened at my university. This has happened at the American Medical Association. This has happened at medical institutions across the West.
Right.
And so I was in touch with Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, a British Palestinian surgeon who was in Gaza the first 43 days of the genocide. And we were in communication almost every day when there was electricity. And he would give me a report of what was going on. And it was shocking. And I was writing it up and trying to get it published in the British Medical Journal. They had already commissioned a piece for me on decolonization. They refused to publish like 6 or 7 different rewrites that I did. I sent it to the LA Times. There was just a lockdown. I met with the American Medical Association Chief Health Equity Officer. I said, listen, we need to make a statement. We need to like come out as a professional group.
Mm-hmm.
And that was silenced. And so what Abu Sitta and I realized was that as he was, in these hospitals that were getting bombed and healthcare workers were being targeted and killed, we over here in the West were being silenced, targeted and silenced. And what both of these two prongs did was enable the genocide. There was no one left here to speak to them, speak up for Palestinians. There was no one left there to care for them. Or very few people, right? And so these two prongs of what Dr. Abu Sitta labeled was the genocide enablement apparatus. We've submitted this to the UN in a report on healthcare workers as human rights defenders. It comes out in the next 10 days. And our submission documents so many instances of repression of healthcare workers, not only here, but in Australia, in the UK, in the US, in Canada. And so these, it's important to recognize that, while that is happening, at UCSF, there is a doctor who injected 2,600 imprisoned people, Black and brown people, with poisons. So pesticides. His name is Dr. Howard Maybach. I wrote about him in our book, Inflamed.
Sure.
And he, did this shortly after the Nuremberg doctor trials at UCSF while on faculty without informed consent. So this reality just shows this man is still getting paid $200,000 a year. In spite of this story breaking in the wake of George Floyd, he still is, a distinguished professor at UCSF. But I talk about the genocide. I point to the dynamics of power, and I am fired. And so these dynamics belie the history at UCSF itself, which is a land-grant university. So in 1862, this land that was stolen from California Native people in the wake of the genocide here was given by Abraham Lincoln to all these universities to start. So the University of California started through a land-grant university as a land grant. And University UCSF itself was the site where Ishi, who is a survivor of the genocide, walked out of the wilderness in 1922, the last surviving member of his tribe, Yaqui people up north, and came down to UCSF. They brought him down to UCSF where they put him on display like a zoo animal. And when he died, he had his brain, taken out and sent to the Smithsonian. So organ theft, organ trafficking. So the sickness of the colonial mentality is deep in this institution. It's a deeply racist institution. So how can we pretend to get health equity or even, quote, advance health equity when we can't even talk about the dynamics of power that are leading children to be shot in the head right now in Gaza or starve to death? And so nothing should be out of the purview of doctors speaking about health. Nothing. That is our job. And to me, when you think about a career, that's not a career worth having where I can't speak up for children who are being killed. That's not a doctor I can be. I can't be that doctor.
Right.
And that's where I came to realizing like there's no career. The price I pay is actually too small. It's too small. I would rather I can't live in a world where we can see this happen and I can be quiet.
Right.
None of us should be quiet right now. And to me, the real shame is all the doctors I know think similarly who have sat quietly because they don't want to upset our racist bosses.
Right.
And these are doctors who, pretend to work on health equity. They care about health equity. They do, but they're not really working on it because they're not willing to confront the structure of power that entrenches the inequities. So that's the problem is most people are kind of stuck in a liberal framework where we talk about things so we can feel good talking about it. And when we don't feel good talking about it, we're not going to talk about it. So if it doesn't feel good and it starts to challenge our own positionality, our own privilege, we stop.
Yeah, there's a door that gets slammed, I think, in that moment. And it's meant to prevent a certain outpouring, right? An outpouring of cognitive dissonance, of, disconnection from what you like, that sort of seated feeling that you understand the world. Like that really gets kind of unnerved. And this is why you say, in your Common Dreams piece, which I recommend everybody read and read closely, that many people like to speak about these things, but no one actually likes to do anything about them. And by which you mean, taking at the very least the risk of speaking out, of identifying in blunt terms what you are seeing, the scale of the suffering, the roots of that suffering. And what you say is that physicians have actually been educated in ways to maintain illiteracy around power, that they've tacitly and unknowingly pledged allegiance to power, which I think is like really like a deeply nuanced way of understanding what's happening, like at the institutional level, that it is a matter of training, actually, that there's like something baked into the education of doctors that makes them quietist, that makes them predisposed to that quietism. Do you think that's fair? And how do you think we move physicians into this place that you recommend of sacrificing the privilege you carry to confront the power that inexorably prevents the needle from moving forward? It's hard. It's a hard sell, right? Convincing people to commit career suicide, but you're saying like that's exactly what is needed in this moment.
That is exactly what is needed in this moment. And we cannot have a liberation medicine until we loosen the chokehold that colonial capitalism has put on our necks. We cannot be free. And we cannot expect our patients to be free until we have liberated ourselves and our voices. We cannot actually practice a medicine of equity. So we should A, either stop talking about it and stop pretending, or B, take that step and walk away from the institutions that will never give us what it is we need, and start building a new framework for medicine, a liberation medicine. And they already do this in Cuba. They already do this in other places where the analysis around power in medicine has leapt forward, leap years ahead of us. And so that to me is it is a hard sell, because most people are so invested. And it's not that it's going to be easy for me. I'm not saying that this is an easy step. I'm a single mom. I have, I have bills to pay. I have things I like to do. And they put a 10-year letter of censure in my file. So I cannot get an academic medicine job for the next, for the rest of my working career, supposedly. And those are the kinds of things that need to be fought. I'm not saying that this will be easy. It won't be easy, but it is necessary if what we desire is health for all.
And like, it shouldn't be too much to ask for people to, at the very least, like try to imagine that. Like, what would that actually look like? What would that require? If we have the technologies that we need, if it's true, like what Bernie Sanders is constantly talking about, that like you live in the richest country in the world, at the very least, you should be able to protect the people in that country. And even that seems like it's a complete afterthought, especially under Trump. I mean, like in the United States, there's this moment now where in California, some folks are rising up to prevent the forced deportation of their friends and their family and their neighbors. And Trump, as a response, is deploying like National Guard troops, which like Governor of
The
California
Marines,
said,
the
what's that?
Marines, the
And the
Marines,
Marines, right? And
right?
like,
Our own military is going to um,
yeah.
police our people. This is an alarm. This is a major alarm. This is what fascism looks like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And people are rising up.
I want to hear what you have to say about this. Like, because from my perspective, like I've heard people bemoan this sort of clash of forces, but in some ways, I'm heartened by it, right? Like this is in some ways a rising up, a prevention of suffering, and it's being met with just like police violence, with military force. I'm curious to hear how you see connections between this moment in California and the kinds of repression you're seeing elsewhere.
Yeah, I just think it's, we have Governor Newsom saying, this is authoritarian and this is horrible. And yes, he's right. But Governor Newsom himself was, throwing unhoused people's wheelchairs in the trash, just, just last year. So
Yeah.
it's wild watching the pot calling the kettle black when it's, it's not popular now, to look like a fascist. But Governor Newsom is, and as all liberals, was paving the way for this kind of explosive, horrific reality. Governor Newsom and all of the Democrats have paved the way because they greased the wheels. So since October 7th, they have participated in the harassment, intimidation, silencing of academics and people and other politicians, the whole structure and system, so that the genocide could go on in Palestine. And so when you have this level of complicity and sort of shades of authoritarianism, people are now starting to connect the dots. And they're starting to see, okay, we have the overwhelming out front fascist response from Trump with mobilizing our own military against our people. That should be setting off alarm bells again for everybody. And it is good to see people out there contesting that we don't want that in this country. That is not what we want. And it remains to be seen how effective the resistance to this will be. Will it be enough to say, okay, free Los Angeles and free Palestine? Or will it just go, let's free this situation, let's stop this over here, but let's continue this horrible, murdering of children and doctors being raped to death, like Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh, who's a former orthopedic surgeon, professor of orthopedic surgery in Gaza. And so as we look at these dynamics, we have to also look at the fact that who's driving this, as in UCSF, is this billionaire class. Right. So when we look at, Donald Trump and his lackeys, but we also look at the Diller Foundation at UCSF. And we look at, in LA, the Resnicks are the largest agricultural business. They have the largest agricultural business in the world, with a revenue of $8 billion a year. And they, pollute the land in California by growing their pistachios and their mandarins and their pomegranates. They hoard most of the water in the area that they are living in, or in the area that their farms are in Kern County. So as LA was on fire, people were like, where's the water? And that led people to learn about the Resnicks. Why do these people have this lion's share of this common resource, which is water? The Dillers make their billions of dollars off of the real estate industry. So in California and San Francisco, they're the largest corporate residential landlord in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. And so they basically dictate the market rate. So when we look at all the Black and brown people and poor people, working class people, unhoused and in the streets, we're seeing that the Dillers, they are also sending money to the West Bank so that settlers can evict Palestinians from their homes. So these people are not only sending money to the Canary Mission, they've sent money to the Canary Mission, which has become Trump's online hit list for students to deport. They are putting people in tents from Frisco to Gaza. And so the sociopathic nature of these billionaires, the billionaire class who has robbed the commons from the people, and that includes our foods, our water, our housing, our healthcare. So while we, the American people, don't have access to these things, our money, our tax dollars are being sent to Israel, where they have universal healthcare and education and these different things. And they're also using that money to destroy the whole healthcare system in Gaza and to enact this genocide. So when people start to understand that our labor, our commons, the fruits of our labor have really been co-opted by the billionaire class, this is really an opportunity to shed light on, how our world is constructed and what it is we need to do to put things like the University of California back in the hands of Californians. So the public good in the public hands. And that is really, the heart of the struggle that we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, and like it's difficult to imagine that transformative moment of like wrestling power back over institutions like the university, which ought to be, a kind of outpost for critical and decolonial thought, but that's not what we see. And I think like the larger goal for me, hearing you talk about the work that you're doing seems to be breaking, destroying the genocide enablement apparatus. Like, like as a almost like worldview that gets perpetuated and that kind of seeps in. I'm reminded, like, you wrote a piece, I think, for Yes Magazine pretty much immediately after October 7th, like the month after, where you said that dehumanization is part of the colonial process and is the prelude to massacre. And you see in every piece of evidence, whether it's Louis Theroux going and redoing the Settlers documentary in the contemporary West Bank, like you see across the board the ways in which racial supremacy is really enshrined in Israel, right? You say in that same piece, Jewish claims to indigeneity in this region are no justification for Israel's actions. That's precisely what is being used, though, to justify this erasure, right? Is this biblical claim to land and the kind of assigning of a biblical villainy to all of Palestine. So I think like you're really trying to drill down into the roots of this genocide enablement apparatus in order to kind of break that wheel. So I mean, I just I want to say I'm inspired really by the example that you're providing, and I do wish that more doctors would use their platforms as trusted professionals to like speak out against these forms of suffering, which are like completely unnecessary, right? That are built into statecraft in certain ways.
Exactly. And the thing is, I was thinking about when we started talking about police violence, racist police violence is an urgent public health threat in the United States, 2013, 2014. So years before George Floyd. And the pushback we got was real. Like, people don't want to contest power. They're okay, talking about things in a theoretical manner, but not actually like, hey, that Black child was just gunned down in the street by the cops. And now it's having these ripple effects in the community around trauma. And so that pushback in that time morphed into more people getting comfortable talking about racism and police violence after George Floyd died in this very visible way, and Breonna Taylor died. And so, or I should say, were killed. And so now we're facing this what is called a white lash, the backlash, where the forces that killed George Floyd are now trying to reestablish themselves as moral, as correct, as right in some way.
As common sense almost, right?
Like, as common, now we're hearing these narratives and it's all spins on narrative. Oh, he didn't die because of a police officer like leaning on his neck. He died because of drugs. And so that way in which we're being told to deny what our eyes are seeing, the mass gaslighting, we're being told, oh, the hospitals weren't really bombed, and Israel is doing everything it can to protect civilians, and we have doctors upon doctors coming back. No, they're shot in the head by these snipers. One single shot to the brain. And so this is an important time to to push back. And it is these new media that are allowing the narrative slippage to happen, a narrative breaking, you can say, if you will, or a fragmenting of narrative. And this is why the ADL, which is, an agent of Israel in the United States, they were found spying on academics in the 90s through the San Francisco Police Department. So the ADL was saying we have a TikTok problem, right? That was back in 2023, and it was because so many young people were supporting Palestine, including young Jews. So a majority of Jews in America under 30 years old support the liberation of Palestine, and are critical, and they're not invested in the project of Israel. And that is the concept of losing the future. And it's a narrative issue. Like, I don't believe in a world like that. Yeah. If a world has to require this level of violence, that's not the world that I want, says most people under 30, right? And so they know it's here. They're not sleeping well. The planet's heating up. Everyone can feel what's happening around the world with our weather, with the, fires, with the destructive weather patterns. We don't also need the annihilation of whole peoples in this process. Yeah. And so the human caused annihilation. So this is, this is an important time to get clear about what kind of medicine do we practice? What kind of vision for health can we hold? How big can it be? And my vision, the one that I've been walking with for many, many years now, is very big. And it's very possible. It's achievable. I see it as achievable. And it will require a struggle. And that is the struggle we are seeing unfold right now.
Yeah, I mean, beautifully put. And I think it's a struggle against that mass gaslighting, as you put it. It's a struggle against a liberal framework that wants to pretend and kind of wait out the horror, or walk away, I think, as you also said. And so, that you can't do that you're not built to do that is, for me, real motivation. It's moving to hear you talk about having to overcome these accusations that you've faced of a lack of professionalism, and just continuing to advocate in spite of that, because I agree with you that, people increasingly can feel and smell and see the sickness of this colonial mentality. It's so hard to turn away. It takes almost an act of will right now for people to kind of turn away and turn it off and tune out. My hope is that, that people see folks like you as authentic, and they see, fascists as fascists, and they see liberals as grandstanding, and start to actually get clear, to use your term, on what's happening.
What the doctors in Gaza have shown me in terms of what it means to be a physician is that they are willing to sacrifice. They have accepted their own deaths in service of their people. In the United States, 16 million people are about to be booted from their health insurance, which is basically a life-shortening event for many people. I don't see any doctors speaking up. I don't see anyone willing to lose their career over that, let alone their lives.
Right.
So the distance between a moral medicine, a medicine that is really in service of the people, which is what the doctors in Palestine have demonstrated to the world, and the distance between what we see in the US, which is doctors complicit in a healthcare system that denies people care all the time. Doctors complicit in the erasure of people in medicine all the time. So to me, becoming aware of actually what violences we are recreating with our own labor, and getting clear about a moral medicine, a liberation medicine. I ask my colleagues to join me and to start to dream that into existence, to start to build that framework, because that is the only way we will see health equity. When we talk about Black mothers dying at 12 times the rate of white mothers in the United States in childbirth. That's not going to be changed by moving a couple things or tweaking a couple things, this initiative and that initiative. That's going to require a wholesale composting of our medical system and letting something better grow. And that's where I'm going. And that's where I feel it's exciting and it's an opportunity. And there are others like us out there. And so let's find each other and let's build. Let's articulate, let's build for the better of all people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I think it's absolutely a question of what we join. There is no turning back. The Palestinian liberation and solidarity movement has in some ways never been stronger than in this moment globally. Keep up the fight. I really appreciate the kind of, the modeling of that oppositional medicine, a deeper medicine. And again, wish you all the best. Thanks so much, Rupa Marya.
Thank you, Scott. Take care.